There is a particular moment that happened in a lot of underwater games. At first, everything's fine. You're swimming through clear water, there are fish, the sunlight reaches you from above. You see the bottom, you know where you are, and then you look down. The seabed disappears, you can't tell how far away it is, you can't tell what's beneath you, and suddenly, something that was so peaceful becomes threatening. Nothing's even attacked you, nothing's even moved, but you feel like you should leave. Why? A completely empty patch of water be more frightening than a monster? Why do games like Subnautica, Soma, Einlang, Dredge, and even games that aren't horror games at all turn the ocean into a place of dread? Perhaps the answer isn't actually in the video games, perhaps it's much older. Because long before there were video games, before there were submarines, before there were humans who could even see the bottom of the ocean, we were already putting the monsters there. For most of human history, the ocean was a place people could travel across, but not a place they could truly see into. A sailor could see the horizon, they could see the waves, they could see the storms, they could see something enormous breach the surface. But beneath them was an environment they had almost no way of observing, and humans have a tendency to fill empty spaces with explanations. Medieval and Renaissance maps are filled with sea monsters. Serpents wrap themselves around ships, strange fish attack sailors, mermaids appear beside coastlines, massive creatures lurk in unexplored waters. These weren't always intended simply as decoration. Some cartographers were generally attempting to represent what they believed existed beneath the ocean. Historical sources, sailors' accounts, and natural history books are all contributing to these images. And there's something fascinating about where these monsters appear. The unknown. The farther away familiar coastlines you went, the stranger the creatures became. The map itself was essentially saying, we don't know what's here. And that uncertainty became a place where monsters could live. Today, we know the ocean covers roughly 70% of Earth's surface. Its average depth is around 3,682 meters, and more than 90% of the ocean is considered deep ocean, water deeper than 200 meters. But here's the strange part. Knowing the ocean is there doesn't mean we will understand what's inside it. The NOAA estimates that humans have visually explored less than 0.001 of the deep ocean seafloor. That's an area roughly comparable to the size of Rhode Island, and that is just the seafloor. The water above it is an enormous environment. There could be hundreds of thousands to around 1 million ocean species, with a large proportion still undiscovered or undescribed. So when a video game shows you a gigantic empty ocean, it necessarily isn't exaggerating the idea of an unknown world. It's taking a very real characteristic part of our planet and turning up the volume. And then there's the light. Sunlight can penetrate the ocean surprisingly far under ideal conditions, but there is a really significant light beyond 200 meters. Between 200 and 1,000 meters is a twilight zone. Below 1,000 meters is the apothic zone. No sunlight reaches it. It is effectively permanent darkness. Imagine that. Descending through the ocean, and at first everything is brightly colored. Then those colors disappear. And eventually everything that's blue becomes black. Darkness. And then there's no natural light at all. This is one of the reasons underwater environments are so useful in horror games. Darkness normally means something has been taken away from you. Your ability to see. Your ability to understand your surroundings. Your ability to anticipate danger. The ocean does all three naturally. And beyond that, humans aren't supposed to be there. We aren't inherently aquatic. Now, that sounds obvious, but video games have found an unusual way of making us forget it. On land, the movement is natural. We walk, we run, we can climb and breathe. But then, underwater changes everything. You need equipment to just stay alive. Your movement becomes different. Your vision becomes restricted, and eventually, you just run out. This isn't just a problem invented by survival games. It is one of the most fundamental limitations of human underwater exploration. And for much of history, going deep into the ocean meant climbing inside something that could protect you from the environment. In 1934, naturalist William Beebe and engineer Otis Barton descended thousands of feet beneath the surface inside a small steel sphere called the bathysphere. It wasn't a comfortable submarine, it was essentially a pressurized metal ball suspended from a cable. Inside, there was barely enough room for 2 people. Their view of the deep came through a tiny quartz windows, and as they descended, sunlight disappeared. Colors vanished. And outside the windows was an environment that almost nobody had ever directly witnessed. The bathysphere eventually reached around 3,028 feet during its series of dives. Beebe has described the creatures that looked almost impossible. Some had never been seen alive before, and because photography was extremely difficult at those depths, artists sometimes had to reconstruct these animals from Beebe's descriptions. For perhaps the first time, humanity wasn't imagining monsters in the deep, we were actually looking at it. And the deep ocean turned out to be stranger than many of the monsters we'd invented. Then in 1960, humans went deeper. On January 23rd, Jacques Piccard and US Navy Lieutenant Don Walsh descended in the bathyscaphe traced to challenge deep in the Mariana Trench. They reached the deepest known part of the Earth's seafloor. Their original depth reading was later corrected to approximately 35,800 feet. Just imagine that. Think about what that means. If you place Mount Everest at the bottom of the Challenger Deep, its summit would still be underwater. And when Piccard and Walsh finally reached the bottom, they didn't find a giant monster. They found something arguably stranger. A landscape of darkness and sediment. A world that had existed largely beyond human experience, now suddenly discovered. The expedition demonstrated something important. The ocean didn't become less mysterious just because we could reach it. It became mysterious in an entirely different way. Because the deeper we looked, the stranger life became. The deep sea is home to organisms that seem almost designed for science fiction. Anglerfish use bioluminescent structures to lure prey. Other animals produce flashes of light. Some are transparent, some are entirely black. Some have enormous mouths designed to take advantage of rare opportunities for food. And bioluminescence isn't a rare novelty. The NOAA estimates that around 80% of animals living between 200 and 1,000 meters in the water column are bioluminescent. Other NOAA educational material puts estimates for pelagic animals even higher, depending on the region and definition used. In an environment without sunlight, life has evolved its own, and that is almost exactly how science fiction would design an alien planet, except this one is real. So what happens when the environment enters video games? Something interesting happens. Games don't simply show us the ocean. They make us operate inside of it, and that distinction matters. A movie can show you a diver entering dark water. A game can make you decide whether to enter. You control the character, you choose where to look, you decide how deep to go, and eventually, you become responsible for your own fear. Perhaps the clearest example is Subnautica. The original concept wasn't supposed to be a horror game. The developers wanted an underwater open world survival game where players didn't kill creatures, but players kept describing it as terrifying. And eventually, the developers began to pray and work with those fears. And you can see why. The game begins in one of the safest environments. Warm water, bright sunlight, and small fish. Shower terrain, and then the world teaches you that this is home. Then gradually, it takes that safety away. The water gets deeper, the light disappears, and the creatures get larger. And eventually, there's nothing underneath you but just open water. This is where Subnautica does something remarkably clever. Its biggest creatures don't always need to attack you. Sometimes you just hear them. You don't know exactly where they are. You can't see through the water. You have limited oxygen. And suddenly, you're aware of something much larger than yourself. The game has turned scale into a weapon. On land, being small isn't necessarily terrifying. But in the ocean, being small means something else. It means that there are creatures better adapted to this environment than you could ever be. They don't need submarines. They don't need an oxygen tank. They don't even need a flashlight. You are the strange creature here. You are the alien. Iron Lung takes the opposite approach. Instead of giving you a beautiful ocean to explore, it takes the ocean away. You're inside a tiny submarine, can't freely look outside. You navigate using instruments, an incomplete map, sensors, and grainy photographs. You don't really know what's outside the hull, and that's the point. The game turns information into a scarce resource. You don't see the monster, you see evidence that something might be there. A sound, a reading, a photograph. A change in surroundings and your brain does the rest. This is one of the oldest tricks in horror, and it reaffirms all the information I've just been giving you. The monsters inside the ocean aren't what make it scary. It's the ocean tricking you to thinking that there might be one. Don't show the monster, show the audience enough information to imagine one. Maybe that's why ocean games are so effective. They don't have to invent an alien world. They already have one. The real ocean is dark. It's enormous, it's difficult to explore, and it contains creatures that just seem impossible. And even after centuries of exploration, there is still so much that we don't know. The monsters on medieval maps were born from that uncertainty. The first deep-sea explorers descended into it. Scientists continue to study it, and video games have transformed it into a place where we can experience that uncertainty ourselves. Because when you're swimming through a dark ocean in a game, the fear isn't really about what's there, it's about what could be there. And maybe that's the oldest ocean story of all. We look into the darkness and wonder what's looking back. So the next time a game asks you to swim into the deep, remember, the developers didn't invent the fear, they just gave you a flashlight and asked you to look.